It's hard to explain what happened out there without sounding like I've either lost my mind or I'm embellishing a war story for effect. But I'm long past the age of trying to impress anyone. What I saw, what I felt, and what I still hear when I close my eyes at night were real. I've told myself that enough times to start believing it. I served as an infantryman in Afghanistan in 2009. Our platoon had been assigned to a forward operating base in the eastern mountains, the kind of place where the terrain was all jagged ridges, narrow valleys, and caves that seemed to have no end. We were stretched thin, running patrols that lasted for days, moving through villages that barely had electricity but carried centuries of suspicion in their eyes whenever we showed up. One late autumn, before the snow started to lock those mountains down, we got intel about insurgent activity along a remote pass. Our squad was tasked to push up through a valley, check out some caves the drones couldn't get a good read on, and make sure no weapons caches or fighters were hiding there. It wasn't a glamorous mission, but then again, none of them were. The higher you climb in those mountains, the more it feels like the land itself wants you gone. Thin air, freezing nights, and silence broken only by wind that cuts through your gear, no matter how much you layer up. We started before dawn, boots crunching on loose rock, rifles slung tight. Our squad leader, Staff Sergeant Miller, kept us in staggered formation as we hiked. He was one of those no-nonsense types, the kind of guy you trust to get you back alive even if it means you hate him the whole way. The climb was brutal. Every few minutes we had to pause and suck in the thin mountain air. Around us, the ridges formed jagged shadows in the early light. Villages disappeared behind us, and it felt like we were marching into a world untouched by people. That valley had an emptiness to it, not just the kind you feel when you're far from civilization, but the kind that feels deliberate, like something had cleared the place out. By mid-morning, we reached the caves. They weren't dramatic gaping mouths like in movies, but low, dark holes cut into the rock. The kind of places you'd miss if you weren't looking carefully. Miller split us into two teams. I was with him, plus Ramirez, a kid from Texas, and Jackson, the quiet one who rarely spoke but had the best eyes of anyone I'd ever met. The other team set up a perimeter while we pushed into the first cave. The air inside was colder than outside, stale and dry, carrying the faint smell of rot. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, bouncing off stone walls that seemed to sweat with condensation. It was narrow, forcing us to move single file. After 20 feet, the light behind us faded, and all we had was the beam ahead. Every sound we made echoed back at us, doubled and distorted. It put me on edge right away, because I knew what normal caves sounded like, and this one seemed to swallow noise unevenly, like the echoes came from different places than where we'd spoken. We didn't find much at first, just scattered trash, the kind you'd expect insurgents to leave if they'd ever camped there. Some burnt wood, food wrappers, a couple of spent casings. But the deeper we went, the stranger it felt. The walls had markings, not spray paint, not scratches from animals, but deliberate carvings. Circles inside circles, jagged lines intersecting. They weren't in any language I recognized, and neither Miller nor Ramirez had seen anything like them either. We shrugged it off as old tribal stuff, though in the back of my mind it didn't sit right. These weren't decorative or religious symbols. They looked more like warnings. About 50 meters in, the tunnel forked. Miller decided we'd push a little farther, and then turn back. That's when the smell hit us harder, like rotting meat, but older, like something that had been sealed away too long. My stomach clenched, and I remember seeing Ramirez cover his nose with his sleeve. We figured maybe an animal had died in there, except Jackson, who was leading, froze mid-step. I'll never forget his voice when he said, "There's something here." In his beam of light, we saw bones, human bones, not just one or two, but a pile shoved against the wall. Skulls cracked open, ribs scattered, femurs stacked like firewood. Some still had scraps of fabric clinging to them, not local clothes either. Looked like old Soviet uniforms, faded and torn. Maybe from the war in the 80s, maybe older. But what stuck with me wasn't just the bones. It was the way they were arranged, like someone had deliberately put them there, in patterns that mirrored the carvings on the walls. Miller cursed under his breath and told us to pull back. We were all spooked by then, though no one wanted to admit it. As we turned, I caught movement in the corner of my light. At first, I thought it was just dust or my nerves, but then it happened again, a shadow that didn't match us, taller, thinner, moving with a jerky rhythm. I called out, asking if anyone else had seen it. They hadn't, but I swear I did. We left the cave fast, all of us breathing harder than the climb warranted. Outside, the other team looked at us funny. Apparently, we'd only been in there 15 minutes, but it felt like over an hour to me. Time had stretched in that place. Miller gave a quick report, and command told us to keep pushing. So we moved to the next cave. This one was worse. The entrance was half collapsed, forcing us to crawl through rubble. Inside, the air was heavy, almost pressing down on us. Our lights flickered, not died, but flickered like there was interference. No reason for that underground. We pushed maybe 30 feet before Jackson hissed at us to stop. Ahead, the beam of his flashlight caught something pale against the dark rock. It was a face, not alive, not fresh, just a face stretched like parchment against the stone, mouth open, eyes hollow. The skin looked dried and fused to the wall itself, as if the cave had swallowed the body whole and left the face behind. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, some rock formation that happened to look human. But as we edged closer, I could see hair matted against the stone, and the hollow socket stared right at me. That was enough for Miller. He ordered us out immediately. We didn't argue. When we regrouped outside, nobody wanted to say much. We kept it clinical, reported the bones, the markings, the strange remains. But when the sun dipped behind the ridge and the valley fell into shadow, that's when the real unease set in, because from the cave mouths behind us came sounds. Not loud, not even clear, but just enough to carry. Whispers too faint to make out words, but layered, like more than one voice at a time. We set up a night perimeter, each of us staring into the dark longer than necessary during our shifts. Every few minutes, I swore I saw movement at the cave entrances, like figures standing just inside, waiting. But when I blinked, they were gone. Jackson admitted later he'd seen the same. Ramirez wouldn't talk about it. That night stretched longer than any I've known. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it faint sounds that I can only describe as sobbing. Low, drawn out, and filled with something that made my chest tighten. At one point, my NVGs picked up a heat signature in the cave we'd first entered. Tall, narrow, humanoid, but flickering like it wasn't fully there. I never told Miller. By morning, command pulled us back. Officially, it was because the terrain was too unstable for operations. Unofficially, I think they didn't want more reports like ours. The caves were sealed with controlled charges, buried under rubble. The official line in the record says they were a hazard, prone to collapse, but I know better. They didn't want anyone else going in. It's been over a decade, and I still dream about those caves, about the whispers and the hollow eyes in the stone. Sometimes I wake up convinced that something followed us out, that the valley didn't just let us leave, it marked us. I've run into Ramirez and Jackson since. We don't talk about it directly, but I see it in their eyes. They hear it too, even though miles away and years removed. War leaves scars in obvious ways, but some scars aren't about bullets or bombs. Some scars are the kind you can't show anyone, the kind that gnaw at you in silence. Those caves in the Afghan mountains weren't empty, and whatever was inside them wasn't human anymore. We went there thinking we were hunting insurgents, but the truth is, we disturbed something older, something that had been waiting in the dark long before any of us were born. And sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room and the lights are out, I swear I hear that same whisper I first heard in the valley, faint and layered, calling me back. I spent most of my deployment in Iraq, telling myself that the desert couldn't surprise me anymore. By the time you've been on the ground for months, you think you've seen every kind of dust storm, every kind of roadside ruin, every shadowy street where something could go wrong. You start to believe the land has no more secrets left to show. But I was wrong. That country had layers, and some of them we were never meant to peel back. It was 2007, and I was stationed with a small detachment near the outskirts of an abandoned industrial complex north of Baghdad. Most of the structures had been looted years earlier, warehouses stripped down to bare concrete, windows smashed, roofs caved in. Our mission was simple enough: conduct night patrols, keep eyes on potential weapons smuggling routes, and make sure no insurgents were using the complex as a base. It sounded routine, and at first it was. The place was just another cluster of ruins in a country littered with them. But there was one building that always caught my eye, even before things went wrong. It sat at the edge of the complex, half sunk into the earth, its roofline barely visible above the sand. Locals called it the old water station, though it hadn't pumped water in decades. It looked more like a bunker, its concrete scarred and blackened, its entryway sealed with a heavy steel door that someone had welded shut. Every time we passed it, I felt uneasy. There was nothing unusual about a sealed-off building, but the way the air cooled near it, the way birds never landed on it, and the way even stray dogs gave it a wide berth, all of it stuck with me. One evening, Command decided we should check it out. Intel suggested insurgents might have been cutting through the back wall to use the place for storage. Our squad, 9 guys led by Sergeant Walker, got the assignment. Nobody was excited. The sun had just gone down, and the desert was cooling fast. You'd think the chill would be welcome after the blistering heat of the day, but the night air carried a dampness that wasn't normal for that region. Even before we went inside, I noticed condensation forming on my rifle. We pried open the door with crowbars, sparks flying as the weld snapped. The smell that rolled out was something I still can't fully describe. It wasn't just rot or mold, though both were there. It was heavier, chemical and organic all at once, like rust mixed with something that had once been alive. A couple of guys gagged. Walker told us to button it up and move in. The inside was worse than the outside. Our flashlights cut across walls coated in grime and streaked with water stains. The floor sloped downward, steps leading us deeper underground. I remember running my glove along the wall and coming away with something that wasn't just dust. It was sticky, almost oily. There were pipes overhead, most of them broken, dripping into rusted puddles. The sound of water echoed strangely, as though the room was larger than our lights revealed. About 50 feet in, the corridor opened into a chamber. It had once been the main pump room, but whatever machinery had been there was now unrecognizable. Metal twisted into shapes that didn't make sense, like it had melted and hardened in place. Some pieces looked bent by force, others warped as if by heat. The strangest part, though, were the markings on the floor. Not graffiti, not random stains. They were deliberate lines and arcs, drawn in what looked like chalk, but glowed faintly when our beams hit them. Walker muttered that it was probably some kind of insurgent ritual or intimidation tactic, but none of us bought that explanation. We pushed deeper. The chamber had a stairwell leading down again, narrower, and that's when Ramirez, our youngest guy, pointed out something that stopped us cold. On the wall beside the stairwell was a handprint, not painted, not carved, pressed into the concrete like clay, fingers splayed wide, too large to be human. The concrete around it was rippled as though it had softened and hardened again. Walker tried to keep us moving, but our nerves were shot. The air grew colder the farther down we went, until we could see our breath fogging in our NVGs. That shouldn't have been possible in Iraq, not in that season. The stairwell ended in another chamber, this one filled with water. A shallow pool spread across the floor, perfectly still despite drips echoing from the pipes above. Our lights reflected off it, too clear, almost like glass. That's when we heard the first sound. Not water, not metal shifting, but voices, faint, overlapping, whispering in English. We froze, rifles up, ears straining. The voices weren't coming from ahead though. They were echoing up from the water itself. I leaned closer against every instinct, and I swear I heard my own name whispered back at me. Not just my name, but my voice, as though I were calling myself from beneath the surface. Ramirez panicked. He fired a burst into the water, the rounds punching holes and sending ripples across the pool. The voices stopped instantly, But the water began to move on its own, not from the bullets, not from us. Waves rolling outward like something underneath was shifting. Walker pulled us back, cursing, trying to keep us together, but by then it was too late. The chamber was alive with sound, metal groaning, whispers building into a chorus, and the water rising without any source feeding it. We scrambled for the stairwell, slipping on wet concrete, gear banging against the walls. As we climbed, the lights began to fail, one after another flickering out. In the dark, we heard footsteps on the stairs below us, heavy, deliberate, not in a hurry, like something was following, pacing itself, knowing we couldn't move fast enough. By the time we reached the first chamber, half the squad was yelling, trying to drown out the noise. My flashlight caught Ramirez, just as he turned to look back, and I'll never forget the expression on his face. His eyes were wide, mouth open, but he wasn't screaming. He was silent, staring into the dark behind us. Then he was just gone. 1 second he was there. The next the beam cut past into nothing but wall. No splash, no fall, no sound. We bolted. The corridor seemed longer than before, stretching, bending. My chest burned. My legs felt heavy, like I was running through water. Behind me, I heard Walker shouting for us not to break formation, but his voice grew muffled, distant. When we finally burst out into the night, the air hit me so hard I collapsed, sucking in desert wind like it was the first breath I'd ever taken. We counted heads, 2 missing, Ramirez and Carter, a quiet kid from Ohio, who'd been covering our rear. Walker wanted to go back, but none of us would follow him. We told command the floor had collapsed, that the 2 men fell into a sub-level we couldn't reach. It wasn't a total lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The building was sealed the next day with C4, reduced to rubble. Official reports said it was unsafe, structurally compromised. The nightmares came immediately. For months after, I dreamed of water pooling under my bed, voices whispering from drains, faces watching me from the surface of puddles. When I finally rotated back home, I thought it would stop. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear my own voice calling me from somewhere far below, like the echo hasn't faded. And when it rains, I catch myself staring into the reflection, half expecting to see someone else looking back. War leaves scars in ways you can't always explain. Some are bullets, some are bombs, and some are the kind of places you were never meant to walk into. That old water station in Iraq wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting, and whatever was down there in the dark, I don't think it was done with us. When I think back to my deployment in 2010, there are plenty of stories I could tell that would sound believable to anyone who has worn the uniform. Long stretches of boredom punctuated by sudden bursts of chaos, the routine patrols that blur together, the constant weight of the body armor, the jokes you make with your squad just to keep sane. But there's one story I never share at reunions, not because it isn't true, but because it's too strange. It doesn't fit the mold of what people expect to hear. It's the kind of thing that makes you sound unstable if you talk about it too openly. Still, I know what I experienced, and the desert outside of Mosul still visits me in my sleep. Our company was tasked with running night patrols along a series of old villages north of the city. Most of them were half abandoned, with mud brick houses collapsing into dust and only a few families clinging to what was left. One of those villages was different though. It was listed on our maps, marked as Al-Hadra, but when we got there, it looked like no one had lived there in decades. The walls were intact, the streets empty, the wells filled in, and not a trace of livestock or human activity. No kids, no old men, no market smells, nothing, just silence. Command told us it had been evacuated during the fighting years earlier and never repopulated. That was good enough for most of us. But Walker, our platoon leader, insisted we sweep it thoroughly every few weeks. He didn't like ghost villages, as he called them, too many places for insurgents to hide. We all complained about the extra miles in the heat, but we followed orders. The first few patrols through Al-Hadra were uneventful. We'd clear the houses, check the crumbling mosques, make sure no weapons were stashed in the ruins. Every time, we came up empty. but none of us liked the place. There was something oppressive about it. The air felt heavier there, like the heat lingered longer, and the silence was absolute. Even the desert dogs that usually haunted the outskirts of every village never came close. It was on our fourth patrol through Al-Hadra that things started to go wrong. It was just after midnight, with a sliver of moon casting long shadows across the dirt streets. My squad was spread out, moving from house to house. I was partnered with Lewis, a farm kid from Iowa, who carried himself like nothing ever rattled him. We pushed into one of the larger buildings, maybe once a town hall or school, judging by its size. The floor was covered in dust so thick our boots left clear prints, but what struck me was that there were no other tracks, not even animal ones. We cleared the first room, then the second, both empty except for broken furniture and sand blown in through the windows. Then Lewis froze. He shined his light on the far wall, and I saw it too. Marks carved deep into the plaster. Not graffiti, not Arabic script, but tall, thin figures, stretched almost stick-like, with circles for heads, and long arms etched over and over in uneven rows. Some of them overlapped, dozens of them, all facing the same direction as if marching toward the doorway. The hair on my arms stood up under my uniform. I wanted to laugh it off as kids' scribbles, but the sheer number of them, the deliberate way they had been carved, made it feel ritualistic. Before we could say anything, Walker's voice came over the radio, telling us to regroup at the center of the village. We stepped back out into the street, and that's when I realized something else. The night had gone dead quiet. Not just the absence of people, but no wind, no insects, nothing. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. At the rally point, everyone looked on edge. A couple of the other guys had found similar carvings in different houses, the same tall stick figures etched into walls, sometimes in places too high for a child to reach. We started to joke about it, calling them the tall men to cut the tension. Walker told us to quit fooling around, but I could see the unease in his face too. He ordered us to finish the sweep quickly and then pull back. That's when Rodriguez, who was on point, shouted that he saw movement at the far end of the village. We all dropped into position, rifles raised, scanning the alleys. At first, I thought it was just a trick of shadows, but then I saw it. A figure standing perfectly still between two crumbling walls. Too thin, too tall, its proportions just slightly off from a human. My stomach dropped. Someone yelled a challenge in Arabic, but the figure didn't move. When we advanced with weapons ready, it vanished. Not ran, not ducked, but simply wasn't there anymore. We swept the alley. Nothing. No footprints in the dust. No disturbed rubble. Walker told us we were pulling out. Nobody argued. The walk back to the vehicles was the longest mile of my life. Every few steps, I felt eyes on me, like something was pacing us from the rooftops. Once I caught Lewis staring over his shoulder, pale as a sheet, but when I asked, he just shook his head. That night, none of us slept. Even back at the FOB, safe behind HESCO walls and guard towers, there was a tension in the squad bay. Lewis kept rubbing his arms, saying he felt cold even though the desert air was still hot. Rodriguez admitted he woke up twice, swearing he heard footsteps outside his bunk. 2 weeks later, command sent us back. We all groaned, tried to make excuses, but it was no use. Al-Hadra was on the patrol schedule, and we were going. From the moment we stepped into the village again, I felt it, like we were walking into a place that didn't want us there. This time, we found more carvings, whole walls covered in them, the stick figure men overlapping until they formed a forest of lines. Some were scratched so deep the plaster crumbled away. The worst was in the mosque. Across the mihrab, where prayers once pointed toward Mecca, hundreds of figures had been carved in a spiral, circling inward until they formed a blackened hole in the wall. The edges of the plaster there were burnt, as though someone had lit fires against it. Then came the smell, not rot, not sewage, but something metallic, like hot iron mixed with earth. It grew stronger, the deeper into the village we went. By the time we reached the far edge, my throat felt raw from it. That's when we saw the well. It was old, stone-lined, partially collapsed, and dry. But carved into the stones were more of the same figures, only this time they were facing downward, as if climbing into the well. When Rodriguez leaned over with his light, he jerked back violently, swearing he saw movement far below, something pale retreating into the dark. We pulled security, while Walker radioed back for instructions. That's when the whispers started, faint at first, like wind carrying words you couldn't quite make out. They grew louder, overlapping, coming from every direction. Some sounded like Arabic, others like English. I swear I heard my mother's voice calling my name in that mix. Lewis clamped his hands over his ears, shaking his head, muttering, "Make it stop." Walker gave the order to retreat immediately. We didn't need to be told twice. As we moved, shapes flickered at the edge of our lights. Too tall, too thin, gliding rather than walking. The whispers followed us all the way to the vehicles, fading only when we crossed the burn and left the village behind. We never went back to El Hadra. Officially, the village was marked as cleared and written off as abandoned. Unofficially, everyone in the platoon knew to avoid it. Nobody talked about what we saw in reports. Nobody wanted to try and explain carvings that made no sense, figures that shouldn't exist, whispers that called us by name. But the memory stuck. A year after I rotated home, I ran into Lewis in a bar stateside. He looked bad, thinner, jittery. We talked about normal things at first, then he leaned close and whispered, "They follow me in mirrors." I wanted to laugh, but his eyes were dead serious. He said he'd woken more than once to see tall figures standing in the corner of his room, just watching. He asked if I ever heard the whispers still. I told him no, but that was a lie. Even now, some nights, when the world is quiet, I hear them again, faint, layered, calling my name in voices I know and don't know. Sometimes I catch myself looking into dark corners, half expecting to see those carved stickmen step out and become real. I tell myself it was just stress, just war playing tricks on our minds. But deep down I know better. Al Hadra wasn't empty, it was waiting. I served 2 tours in Iraq, both long enough to leave me with memories that don't sit quietly when the nights get too still. Most of what I saw I can explain, even if I don't like to talk about it. Combat has a logic, even in chaos. But there's one thing from my first deployment in 2006 that I still can't make sense of, no matter how many times I go over it. We were operating out of a forward base in Anbar province, about 30 miles west of Ramadi. Our platoon was tasked with route clearance and area security, mostly boring but essential work, driving long stretches of desert highway looking for IEDs, keeping villages supplied and showing presence so insurgents wouldn't feel comfortable moving freely. It was repetitive, stressful, but straightforward. Then came the order to check out a small village marked on our maps but not on any updated patrol reports. The intel guys said it was strange. Satellite images showed buildings, maybe 15 to 20 structures, clustered along a dry riverbed. But no one had logged any activity there in months. No heat signatures, no vehicle tracks, no sign of life. The higher-ups wanted us to confirm whether it was abandoned, infiltrated, or just overlooked. We set out one morning in a 4-vehicle convoy, 2 MRAPs and 2 Humvees. I was in the rear Humvee, behind our squad leader, Sergeant Donnelly, who had a sharp nose for trouble. The sun was already brutal by the time we rolled off the main road, bouncing across the desert hardpan. Dust rose in thick plumes behind us, catching in the back of our throats. The village appeared after about 45 minutes, flat-roofed clay buildings clustered in a shallow depression. From a distance it looked ordinary enough, like dozens of others we'd seen. But as we got closer, the silence settled in. No kids running out to watch us, no goats or chickens scratching at the ground, no sound of generators, or even wind through the alleys. We dismounted cautiously. The village felt like a movie set left behind after filming. Doors stood open, but the interiors were empty of furniture. A well sat in the center of the square, dry as bone. The ground was littered with belongings, blankets, sandals, cooking pots, scattered as if people had left in a hurry. But there were no bodies, no signs of a firefight, No shell casings or blood stains, just absence. Maybe they got relocated, one of the guys muttered. But Donnelly shook his head. Relocated, they take their stuff. This is something else. We split into pairs to clear the buildings. Inside each one was the same story. Dust layering every surface, abandoned belongings, and that peculiar feeling you get when you step into a place that should be warm with life but isn't. In one house, I found a half-cooked meal left on a clay stove, long hardened into black crust. It had to have been years old, yet the impression was that someone had stepped away mid-bite and never returned. Then we started hearing things. At first it was faint, what sounded like whispers drifting through the alleys. I thought it was the other squads, maybe voices carrying weird in the hot air. But when I asked over comms, everyone swore they were silent. Then Private Moreno froze in the street, pointing toward the edge of the village. He said he saw a man standing there, dressed in a torn dish dasha, watching us. Donnelly ordered us to move in that direction, but when we got there, the spot was empty. No footprints in the dust, nothing. By midday we'd cleared the entire village. Still no sign of anyone. We regrouped at the square to radio back, and that's when Specialist Green started vomiting. He said he smelled something rotten, like spoiled meat. The rest of us sniffed the air but caught nothing but dust. Still, a few minutes later, I got it too, an acrid stench wafting from nowhere. It came in waves, strong enough to make my eyes water, then vanished. The captain back at base ordered us to hold position until a civil affairs team could come investigate the abandonment. None of us liked that. Staying overnight in a dead village wasn't appealing, but orders were orders. We set up a perimeter, parked the MRAPs facing out, and posted watch. The hours dragged. Heat gave way to chilling desert night, and as darkness settled, the whispers returned. Only this time, everyone heard them. They rose and fell like conversations in another room, always just beyond the next wall. Some swore they caught English words mixed in, snatches of phrases like "help me" or "don't go." Donnelly tried to keep us calm, saying it was the wind tunneling through the alleys. But I've lived through desert winds, and this wasn't that. Around 2300, Private Clark, who was on watch at the east end, reported movement near one of the houses. Donnelly and I hustled over, NVGs scanning. We caught sight of a figure ducking into a doorway, tall, gaunt, with eyeshine that flashed white-green in our goggles. We swept the building but found nothing, not even footprints. Clark swore up and down that he saw it clear as day. His hands were shaking so bad, he could barely keep hold of his rifle. That night, none of us really slept. When I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing over me, breathing slow and steady. Once I cracked an eye open and thought I saw silhouettes gathered near the well. I told myself it was a trick of starlight. Morning came gray and thin. The village looked the same as before, silent and abandoned, but now it carried a weight, like the air itself had thickened. Green had developed a fever overnight, muttering about voices calling his name. Moreno insisted he'd seen a child's face peering from a rooftop, even though the ladder up there was broken and the dust was undisturbed. When the civil affairs team finally arrived around noon, we were more than ready to hand it over. But as soon as their Humvees rolled into the square, their radios cut out. Dead silence on every channel. They tried swapping batteries, checking antennas. Nothing worked until they drove back out a half-mile, where suddenly comms came back like flipping a switch. That rattled even the officers. After a heated exchange, they told us to do one more sweep with them, then we'd pull out. We went building by building again, this time more thorough. In one of the larger houses, beneath a cracked rug, we found a cellar door. It was small, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Donnelly insisted we check it. The air inside was suffocating, thick with that same rotten stench from before. We dropped chem lights down, illuminating a narrow chamber dug into the earth. On the walls were markings, charcoal drawings of figures with elongated limbs, circles of stick figures surrounding dark blotches. At the far end, half buried in dirt, lay a pile of bones, not just human, animal too. Skulls of goats, dogs, and something else I couldn't identify, larger than a man's but wrong in shape. Green lost it completely then, screaming that we had to leave. The civil affairs guys looked pale, muttering about bringing in higher command, but Donnelly just kept staring at the drawings, jaw tight, like he recognized something but wasn't saying. We pulled out an hour later, convoy rolling fast back toward base. No one spoke the whole ride. Green's fever spiked that night, and by the next day he was medevaced out. Last I heard, he never came back to duty. The official report called it an abandoned settlement with evidence of ritual activity. Command ordered the site sealed and marked off limits. Not long after, an airstrike leveled the whole area. They said it was to prevent insurgents from using the structures, but we all knew there was more to it. Years later, I still dream about that place. The whispers, the faces in the dark, the cellar with its markings and bones. Sometimes in the quiet of my room, I swear I catch that same rotten stench, just faint, curling at the edge of memory. And I wonder if whatever hollowed out that village is still there, waiting for someone else to stumble in. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2009 with the 82nd Airborne. Most of our work was small patrols through valleys and villages, building relationships with locals, keeping an eye on the routes insurgents favored, and making sure no one was planting bombs where they shouldn't. I'd already spent months adjusting to the rhythm of life there. The dry air, the constant scanning of rooftops and ridgelines, the long stretches of boredom cut through with bursts of fear. But there's one mission that sits heavier than the rest. Not because of combat, but because of something else, something I can't explain even to myself. It started with reports from villagers about sounds in the hills east of our outpost. They said people were hearing cries at night, sometimes like women wailing, sometimes like animals screaming. A few swore they'd seen figures moving along the ridges, tall and thin, but not Taliban. The Afghan National Army guys who worked with us laughed it off, but they refused to patrol near those hills after dark. Our captain didn't believe in ghost stories, but he wanted to know if insurgents were staging up there, so he ordered a reconnaissance sweep. There were 8 of us on that patrol. We set out late afternoon, planning to cross the hills before nightfall, check for caves or weapons caches, and loop back to base by morning. The terrain was rough, rocky paths climbing into jagged ridges that cut sharp against the sky. As the sun dropped, shadows stretched long and deep, filling the gullies like pools of ink. By the time we reached the first ridgeline, the valley below was already sinking into darkness. We paused to scan with optics. Nothing moved, no heat signatures, no signs of campfires or people. It should have felt reassuring, but it didn't. The silence pressed against us, thicker than usual, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. We pushed on. Headlamps dimmed to red. The path narrowed along a cliff face, forcing us into single file. That's when I first noticed the sound. At first it was faint, like wind carrying a note too low to identify. Then it swelled, rising and falling in strange rhythms, not quite human, not quite animal. It seemed to drift from all directions, bouncing off the rock. Echoes, one of the guys muttered. But it wasn't. Echoes repeat what you put out. This was something else, like voices calling across a distance we couldn't measure. Donnelly, different Donnelly than the one from Iraq, just bad coincidence, was on point. He froze, holding up a fist. We all crouched low, scanning. Through my NVGs I caught movement up the slope. A figure standing still among the rocks, too far to identify but shaped like a man. We trained rifles on it. Donnelly called out in Pashto, ordering them to step forward. No response, the figure didn't move. Then in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Not ducking behind cover, not running, just not there anymore. Nobody said much. We'd all seen something, but no 2 descriptions matched. One guy swore it was tall as a tree. Another said it was hunched and short. I just knew it had been there, and then it wasn't. We continued on, more tense than before. The sounds followed us, sometimes faint, sometimes so close I wanted to tear my headset off. A couple of the guys whispered about Jinn, but Donnelly shut that talk down fast. Keep your heads. It's insurgents screwing with us. He sounded confident, but I saw the way his jaw clenched. Near midnight, we reached a plateau dotted with old stone walls, maybe ruins of an ancient settlement. We decided to rest there before making the loop back. The air was cold, biting through our uniforms, and the sky was clear enough to see every star. For a moment it felt almost peaceful. Then Green, different guy than the one from Iraq, though I almost laughed at the coincidence, said he heard footsteps behind one of the walls. We formed a half circle and swept the ruins with lights. Nothing. The walls were low, maybe 3 feet high, nothing to hide behind. Still, the footsteps came again, clear as day, crunching gravel, circling us. Then they stopped. We huddled tighter, nerves fraying. Moreno, who always cracked jokes to keep fear away, muttered, "This place is wrong, man." No one argued. That's when the screaming started. It came from the valley below, echoing upward, high-pitched and desperate. At first I thought it was a woman or a child, but the pitch shifted in ways no human voice should. It warped mid-note, stretching long and ragged, then cutting off suddenly. We all froze, rifles raised. "Could be a recording," Donnelly said, his voice shaking. But if it was, whoever was playing it had to be in the valley, and our optics still showed nothing. The screaming started again, this time closer. It didn't echo right. The sound seemed to come from inside our circle of ruins. We spun in place, lights sweeping, rifles trembling. There was nothing there, just cold rock and dust. No one slept that night. We held our perimeter until dawn, nerves wound so tight every pebble shift made us flinch. When the first light hit the mountains, the sound stopped, as if someone had cut a switch. We moved fast on the return route, too rattled to linger. But the hills weren't done with us. Halfway back, Clark tripped and slid down a slope, tumbling into a shallow ravine. When we scrambled to help him, he was on his knees, shaking and pointing at the dirt. There, pressed into the dry earth, were footprints, not his. These were longer, narrower, almost skeletal, leading into a narrow crack between rocks. The trail ended at the shadows of that crack, no sign of entry or exit. Clark swore he felt hands grabbing at him when he fell. We pulled him up and didn't argue. Back at base, we filed our report. No insurgents, no caches, no activity. Officially, that was the truth. Unofficially, we didn't say much. What could we say? That the mountains themselves whispered and screamed at us. That figures appeared and vanished like smoke. That footprints led into cracks too small for a child, let alone something human. The A&A guys refused to even look at the hills after that. A few weeks later, word spread that another unit sent the same direction never checked in. The brass said they hit an ambush, but no bodies were recovered, no equipment, nothing, just silence, like the hills had swallowed them whole. Even now, years later, I dream about those sounds. Sometimes I'll wake in the night, certain I hear them just outside my window. The high, warping screams, the whispers rising and falling like a tide. And when I do, I don't breathe, I don't move, because I'm afraid that if I answer, whatever was in those hills will remember me and come calling again.
If you liked the video, don't forget to like and share. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this.